Hi, I'm Lucas, and welcome to Book 101 Review. Book 101 is all about the books that I read for the last 40 years. And today I have my special guest. She is a trauma recovery expert, no other than Miss Karen Robinson. Welcome to Book 101, Miss Karen, and can you please introduce more about yourself?
Crystal, thank you for having me on your show today. My name is Karen Robinson, and I am a trauma recovery expert. I've been a mental health therapist for over 25 years, and I also do transformational coaching.
Miss Karen Robinson, thank you so much for sharing your knowledge and wisdom to the world. And today, let's talk about the importance of community when recovering from trauma. How does trauma typically isolate people, and why is a community so vital to breaking that isolation?
Right. It's our natural human tendency when we've been hurt or injured to feel embarrassed, to feel shame. We get depressed, low energy, low motivation. And so we tend to isolate. And so just making the decision to attend a support group or join a community to share what's on your heart and on your mind alone is a huge step in the healing journey. And in fact, research has proven it to be more effective than one-on-one therapy sessions.
Effective for sure. Miss Karen, what does research show about how community support impacts trauma recovery compared to healing alone?
Right. I believe also research supports this, but I've seen it with my own eyes. When you're in a group of people and you're sharing, you don't only just have the group monitor or the therapist feedback and wisdom, you have the collective group wisdom. There's other people that have been where you're at. It may not look the same, but the emotions that come up are very similar. And so what I have found is the collective wisdom in the group is very powerful. It's almost like that saying, two heads are better than one. Well, four heads, five heads, six heads are way better than one.
Yes, for sure. And how you define a healing community in the context of trauma recovery?
Yeah. Well, what's most important is that the community feels safe. And so, in order for the community to feel safe, there has to be this understanding that what is said in the group stays in the group. So, you can't talk about other people's experiences when you're in the group. You certainly can talk about yourself. You can tell your partner, oh, in group today, I talked about and share what you share, but you can't share other people's private information. So there's this understanding or agreement that what is said by another, you keep it extremely confidential. So that builds safety and trust.
Why is it, or why are connection with others who've experienced similar trauma so powerful?
Yeah. You simply just don't feel alone. Trauma isolates us, like we mentioned earlier, and we can feel like we're the only one in the world going through something. We can feel unlovable. We can feel there's something defective about us. There must be something wrong with me, that bad things are happening to me. And so when you bear witness that it actually happens to other people, yes, we have compassion, we'll feel sad for the other, but we also feel like, oh, it isn't just me. So it's a feeling of just belonging to a group of people that are on that same struggle and seeing that healing and hope are possible.
Definitely, hope is possible, people. Don't lose hope. How can communities avoid traumatizing survivors while still creating space for shared stories?
It's such a great question. So there's this thing in trauma healing that we call trigger warnings. So this is one I often encourage survivors, like you can share, but a lot of detail about specifics are not necessary. But if you're going to choose to share them, give a warning to the group. So if somebody else has gone through, let's say the example of gun violence or sexual assault, they can choose to excuse themselves if it's too soon in their recovery to hear it. So we give people the option of maybe not hearing something that's going to re-traumatize them.
Very well said, Miss Karen. Very well said. Let's talk about the building safe spaces. What are the key qualities of community that foster trauma recovery?
Well, I obviously believe that the communities best run are when there's a trauma competent therapist in the room as a moderator and a supporter. This is incredibly important in case someone is triggered or re-traumatized or very dysregulated, because that therapist will have the skills to support that person. So
Hmm.
that's one thing. The other thing we talked about earlier is confidentiality in this space. Another thing that tends to help is when people respect others by one person talking at a time, attentively listening to the other, making encouraging statements like, that sounds really tough. I am so glad you survived that. So that validation, that support, encouragement, those are all really helpful ingredients if you're running a support group.
Miss Karen, how can leaders or allies create inclusive communities for survivors without overstepping boundaries?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and so this means practicing what you preach. And so one of the things, like my co-leader, we're doing a retreat for couples in Italy next year, and we chose this bed and breakfast place to host the retreat where the couple is gay. And so I think if there's couples out there that are looking for a healing retreat, that's a message for them that we really do value inclusiveness, that we value diversity, that we value people just to show up as you are. We're not asking you to be a certain way in order to attend and get healing. So that's an example.
Good example, Miss Karen. Empowering indeed. What mistake do well-intentioned communities often make when you're trying to support trauma survivors?
Okay, so I didn't hear the beginning of that question either. The clapping is louder than your voice. Though it's nice.
Yes. So, what mistakes do well-intentioned communities often make when trying to support trauma survivors?
That's such an important thing to ask as well. Well, the one that comes to mind is when there's somebody in the group that might be struggling with suicidal thoughts. It's really important. And again, this is why a trauma competent or a therapist that's been well trained in suicide intervention is incredibly important, because that person may need more help than the group can offer in that moment. So safety has to be first, and this person needs a full assessment on their risk of suicide. So if the client says, I'm going to be okay, but they have been thinking about killing themselves, the person that's an expert in the field knows the right questions to ask to determine next level of care and can make a safe decision on what happens next. Where somebody who doesn't have that competency, they can make the mistake and think, oh, that person said they'll be okay, so I'm going to let them, go home, and then they could kill themselves. So that would be horrific, right?
Yes.
So that's the first thing that comes to my mind is suicide is a big problem with trauma survivors and mental health in general.
Miss Karen, let's talk about the cultural and systemic factors. How does cultural background influence the way people seek or experience community healing?
Hmm. Yeah, I think that can be culturally specific, but I also think it's important when we lead trauma recovery groups and communities that we consider that cultural context, right? Because things like the Holocaust has had a long lasting imprint in our global world. Racism and slavery continues to wreak havoc in our communities. And so it's really important that we study history because history tends to repeat itself if we're not careful. And so, really looking at the culture that we're living and working in and what has been the oppressive points, oppressive, right? Who's been oppressed? How does that look like? And what kind of cultural healings make sense? So, for example, if I'm working with a group of African American children and I'm doing it with a Caucasian lens only, and I don't understand anything about African American history or the oppression, and then let's say I'm offering food that doesn't relate to their culture, that's not being very culturally aware or sensitive. So all that matters. Like you really need to do your homework when you go to help other countries because sometimes you can do more harm than good if you're not being mindful of what culturally is appropriate to offer. And there's things like, for example, some cultures struggle with eye contact or that's part of their cultural background not to make eye contact. It could be a form of disrespect. Well, in American culture, Americans think you're being disrespectful if you don't do eye contact. So it's really important to know the culture that you're working with and the differences and the similarities too. Those are important.
Definitely. And Miss Karen, as a trauma recovery expert, what are your short term and long term goals?
Hmm. Well, my short term goal one is I'm working on a memoir and a teaching method in a book that's coming out early next year. So that's a short term goal. A longer term goal is to set up multiple retreats globally where people can come and have healing for their wounds. I'm setting these up for women and I'm setting them up for couples. And once I have enough men interested or people who identify as male, I will go ahead and offer retreats for them as well. So that's something I'm looking forward to.
Good luck to your goals, Miss Karen, and looking forward for more success. And what will be your piece of advice for those people out there recovering from a trauma?
Mhm. My best piece of advice is you're going to want to give up at times if you've been through a lot. If you have a lot of wounding, a lot of trauma, it is normal and natural to want to kind of give up because it's exhausting. And there is so much beauty behind healing. There can be so much growth, so many opportunities. It's just really important not to give up.
Yes, don't give up, people. Don't lose hope, too. Try and try and try until you succeed. And Miss Karen, would you please recommend a book that influenced your journey or books that influence your journey?
Mhm. It's so interesting, this question, because I worked with a man in Okinawa, Japan for 5 years. I worked in Japan as a federal therapist there for a while. And he kept recommending this book called A Man's Search for Meaning. And I was like, could he just stop talking about that book? And I thought it was just going to be male centered and maybe not helpful. But one day I decided to pick up that book. And it's by an author called Viktor Frankl. He's a psychiatrist. He's also Jewish and a Holocaust survivor. And he talks about his journey in the concentration camps. And his story is so incredibly powerful and inspirational because he found meaning in the experience and the misery, and he was able to help support and empower other survivors. And because of this, he survived and he empowered other people to survive that horrific experience. So to this day, that book continues to inspire me. It's incredibly empowering to read.
Yes, people. Man's Search for Meaning by Viktor L. Frankl. Highly recommended. It's something else. And thank you for that recommendation, Miss Karen. And how can communities help survivors transition from victim to thrive identities?
Yeah. I think the answer to that is focusing on, do the healing work. That is important, but you want to keep going. And after the healing is when you're thriving in your relationships. But even past that is creating the dreams. What is it that you want your future to look like? And once you know what you want, practicing that vision, writing down action steps that you can take for that dream, that's the beauty. That's why we keep going.
Yes. Keep going and going and going, people, because life is too short. How do you balance the need for connection with the need for personal space during healing?
Mm. I love that question because I am 50% extroverted and 50% introverted. So I actually really do need a lot of social time, but I also need a lot of alone time. And I think it's just the answer to that is really knowing yourself and knowing what fills up your cup. So if you know that you're mostly introverted, you want to have a social calendar and you get to decide on what that looks like. But you do want to set goals like, okay, what are a couple activities I'm going to be involved in socially each month? But also look at when you're alone, how are you going to nourish yourself? How are you going to nurture yourself and work on your healing? So it's super important to get to know yourself better.
Yes, definitely know yourself and love yourself, people. When might a community dynamic become unhealthy for recovery, and how can someone recognize that?
Yeah, the word that comes to mind there is when it's toxic. This is if you're in a community where you feel like you're being controlled, where you don't feel like you have agency to make your own decisions. A good leader will motivate you to lead yourself and isn't going to boss you around, control you, tell you what to do. So if you're feeling that way, or you are not feeling like you're being inspired, maybe it's time to move on and try a different community.
Yes, for sure. And how can a trauma survivors advocate for their needs within community setting?
So for this, I really recommend role playing. And so this can be with someone you trust. It could be your personal therapist, a friend, a family member that you trust. You practice that. Or maybe you're the community member where the other person is you, and you just keep switching back and forth. And you're practicing using your voice and advocating for yourself. You're practicing I statements. You're practicing on saying what you need. And when you role play that, and even imagining role playing, that gives you the courage to have a little more difficult conversation.
Miss Karen, what role do rituals or collective practices play in communal healing?
Like institutions, is that what you're referring
Yes,
to?
like
Yeah.
memorials or art. Or
Yeah. Well, creative expression is huge for trauma survivors because if you think about your childhood development or that developmental traumas that happen, a lot of us get the message that we can't play, that we can't relax, we're totally dysregulated. And even though we're not being chased by a tiger or under threat as in adulthood like we were as a child, now there's exceptions if you're living in domestic violence or if you're in a community where there's lots of gangs, and yeah, you're still under threat. But when you can get your system and your body in a safe place and can regulate yourself, being creative, whether that's drawing, writing, painting, music, all of those are just beautiful releases. And the more you practice it, it's such an uplift to your mind, body, and spirit to express yourself in a creative way.
Definitely express yourself, people. Paint yourselves. So, how can workplaces, schools, or faith groups become trauma informed communities?
Yeah. It's simple. It's training. Sign up for trainings. Now more than ever, there's more training about how to have a trauma-informed workplace or trauma-informed schools. Even a lot more churches are doing their work. I know I belong to a non-denominational church, and we're actually hosting a summit on the impact of religious trauma and how to make churches safer for survivors, right? So there's a lot of work being done and more work to do in this area.
Well, interesting activities, Miss Karen. And what are the tangible ways friends or family can show up for someone recovering from trauma?
Yeah. The best way to show up for someone is simply just sit with them. Don't worry about having the right words. Oftentimes there are no right words, especially during a recent trauma. But just being there and say, I'm here for what you need. And I also recommend maybe not asking people or not asking over and over, what can I do? What can I do? How can I help? Put yourself in that person's place and just make a couple guesses. Like, maybe I can look in their refrigerator, and if there's not a lot of groceries, maybe I could just simply go to the grocery store for them. Or like, I'm noticing that they're crying a lot and their nose is super red and getting sore. Maybe I can go out and buy a higher quality tissue, that would be a little more sensitive. Or maybe I can buy some essential oils that we can diffuse in the house that will be more calming. So it's really looking around and just asking yourself, well, maybe what would I need in this moment? Because sometimes when people are in a recent trauma or grieving, they feel very stuck and they could be frozen. They may not even have it. They may not be able to tap into what they need in the moment. So you can make some guesses.
Yes, guesses, people, to help them from the grieving. And Miss Karen, before we wrap up our discussion for today, I'm inviting you to please do listen to my other podcast, people, because my abstract essay is already in fifth season, abstract poetry in second season, and my book 101 review in fifth season too, comedy 101 in second season, and my food 101 in fifth season as well, geography 101 in fourth season, my baby podcast Law 101 and Mental Health 101, Love Letters in third season, and Movie 101 Review and Music 101 in fourth season, and Science 101 and Sex 101 in its first season. Please listen to them wherever you listen your podcasts. And Miss Karen, what's one thing you wish everyone understood about the link between community and trauma recovery?
I think to answer that is a lot of people don't want to be in community when they're hurting. They feel like their pain is too private. And so I just like to remind you, if that's you, there's just so many benefits to being in community. Just consider being a little bit open-minded to it. If you try one group and it's not the right fit, try another. Just don't give up on searching, or reach out to me and maybe I can help you get plugged into a community. And I also have a community that's virtual for people.
Yes, people, let's communicate. Let's do network, Miss Karen Robinson, and for sure she will help you a lot in your grieving. Miss Karen Robinson, thank you so much for sharing your knowledge and wisdom to the world. So can you please invite our listeners to support your advocacy, your projects, or anything that you're doing right now.
Thank you so much for hosting me today.
Yes. So where do people can reach you, Miss Karen?
Yes, my email is healthrivedream@gmail.com, and my website is healthrivedream.com.
Yes. Unhealed trauma limits everything. Are you tired of living with limits? Yes, people, let's support Miss Karen Robinson, because if you support her, for sure, more and more empowering advocacy of grieving, and more empowering coaching to come. So, Miss Karen, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you.
Monica, people, see you soon.